Thank you for us arriving here. And that's important. It's not thank you folks for arriving. It's thank you for us arriving, because no matter what paths we've taken in our lives, somehow we ended up in this point right here. And we have to give thanks to the Creator for the beautiful land, the beautiful resources that we have. And so I give thanks for that. And in English, I have to give thanks for our health. You know, today is a day of celebration, but we can't forget that there's a lot of suffering going on. Mother Nature isn't happy, and she's really showing her power. And so we have to pray for those who are suffering. You have to give thanks for our health that we have here, our protection that we have, that the land protects us. And so we give thanks to those who are helping with those who are suffering, but we also want to give thanks for us that we are protected from Mother Nature itself, because although she takes care of us, she also sends us reminders once in a while. And we talked about that earlier today, the importance of the floods that we had in the spring. They're a reminder of the power of water, the power of that sacredness, the fragility of our own lives and what we depend on. We depend on safety, we depend on that protection, but sometimes we're not in charge. You know, sometimes we have to acknowledge that we have to be humble with how we utilize these resources, how we share in these resources, but more importantly, how we protect these resources. And that's why I love the morning. So for all those who just took the bus up here and missed the workshop, you missed a very spectacular session in the morning. We had the importance of our children mentioned, the importance of our future generations, the value of the knowledge that our children bring us with those simple ideas as to how to fix the problems that we face on a regular basis, and the vision that they can provide us, that guidance that they can provide us. It's invaluable, it's priceless, and it comes with such a place of innocence and trust that we'll do the things that's right for them. And so we have to take that into consideration, that this is a responsibility. It's not co-management, it's co-responsibility to protect these lands, to protect the resources that are here, to protect all that's around us. And so I just wanted to give thanks for everyone for playing a role in that. No matter which avenue you've taken to get here, you're here. Whether you're with the non-for-profits, you know, the Friends of Black Mountain, so important, because you're the ones that are on the ground doing the work to protect these sites, to acknowledge the resources that are here. Thank you to the higher ups that, you know, are elected into your positions and often just thrown into these areas that you may or may not have background in. But you take seriousness in that responsibility, and you make sure that the people that you help guide are doing the work in a very positive way. So I want to give thanks to my chief and council for continuing to support this, our past chief and council for laying the groundwork so that we can celebrate here today. I want to give thanks to, you know, obviously all the mayors, all the council members that are in attendance. You know, we look to you for guidance, but really I come from a place of community, so I want to thank all of the people here. I don't care who you are, we're all people here today, and we're connecting with the land. As I mentioned this morning, that resonation of our language, you know, when I share that language, I'm speaking to our elders, I'm speaking to our ancestors, I'm calling on them to support me, because it gets scary. You know, I'm often thrust into these positions of, okay, now I'll go ahead and speak in front of all these really important elected officials, and I'm going like, I'm just little old me. And so it gets a little intimidating. So when I speak my language, it fills me with that power. It takes away my fears. It takes away my reluctance to share. And so I want to give thanks to our elders and our ancestors for making sure that I have a place to call home, a language to call my own, and people who are so eager to share in that language. And I give thanks to everyone that's saying the words. I give thanks to those who are acknowledging sntsk'il'ntn. This mountain is beautiful for us. And so this will lead naturally into my Segway tour, because that's what I planned, right? But that sntsk'il'ntn, it's a very important word. It acknowledges the use of this place. So we talked about that in the morning. We can look down And we can see it. Sncəwips refers to the area in Peachland near Antlers Beach, all the way across almost into the Green Bay area. Sncəwips is that place of change, right? We talked about the winds coming. You can feel the winds coming from all directions, and they create that change in the community, and they wash the shores and cleanse the land. Sntsk'il'ntn, it represents the place where we gather the resources for things like arrowheads. This is the place where flint rock is found, or was found. I'm sure if we look hard enough, because I know I have community members that helped with that fire mitigation, they came across a few things here and there, and that's a good thing. Because our practices are still alive, our culture is still alive, the use of these lands are still alive. So this place of coming to the top to find our resources, it's very important. But as you can see so much more. This spot right here was so important to our people because we're aware of everything around us. We're aware of who's coming down from the east. We're aware of who's coming up from the south and who's coming from the north. And we'll take a walk up there and you'll be able to see that. But even more importantly, you look up at Little White there. We're aware of the seasons. We don't follow the Western calendar of September. Okay, today is the solstice, so now today is officially fall. That doesn't mean much to me because fall will happen when fall decides it's going to happen. But I could look at the mountain, I go, yep, fall's definitely coming because there's snow on them hills. And so it really helps. But that was our weatherman. That was our Wesla Wong and our Dwaynes that really kind of tell us what's going to happen. And so that mountain itself is important because then we can tell what needs to happen next. And so this morning, Crystal mentioned the word Okanagan, and that word Okanagan. That Okanagan doesn't translate to Okanagan. And Okanagan, it doesn't really mean much to us in a language sense. That Okanagan was that message carrier. And so what we'd have people up here majority of the year just being here. They were the stewards of this particular place to make sure that when people came, they were only taking what was appropriate to take. But they'd also say, hey, Okanagan, you gotta run down that mountain now and pass on the message that winter is coming. You know, Ned Stark was in the house and he said, winter is coming, so go tell the people. And so they would have to, and I'm not even joking, they would run. Those Okanagan, when I talk about this, it's easy for children to imagine the role of a runner, the role of a message carrier, because I could say they would have to run up and down those hills, and those kids they're full of energy. They're going, yeah, that's reasonable, we can definitely make it. That's what we do. Today, when I look around and going, yeah, we just go ahead and run down that mountain and go pass on the message, you know, it's a little daunting. But that's what would happen. We would have those people in those particular places to acknowledge the resources, to be the stewards, the managers of those areas, and then we'd send the runners to say, winter is coming, or someone's coming from the north, do we know who that is? Someone's coming from the east, do we know who that is? So there's really a value and an important site of acknowledging this as a viewpoint, you know, the top of the mountain. It's very important to our people because you have to be aware of everything that's around. It wasn't just a guessing game. We had very complex systems. So the weather was very important to us because in the wintertime, we go to our winter homes. If you look down below, and you can come a little bit closer if you want to see. If you look down below, you can see Mission Creek. You can see Sncəwips. So I'm going to put this in relation. So up here is where we come to find the flint rock to shape things like arrowheads. Down below we have Sncəwips. Sncəwips acknowledges the place where we'd shape those arrowheads. So we'd gather the resources up here, we'd bring them back down to where our permanent winter settlements were, and then we'd begin to shape those resources. And so we have to explain that those arrowheads, when I say arrowheads, people are like, oh yeah, they're ready for war, they're making bows and arrows and ready to, you know, fight. But those arrowheads are so much more than just tools for fight. We're not a warring nation. I mentioned that before. We were peaceful people. Those tools were very important to us. From here, oh, I'm turning the wrong way. From here, you can also see Mount Bushery. Mount Bushery, so Mayor Finlater, he's representing Mount Bushery here. It's a very important place for us because that story about how Mount Bushery was once a larger mountain and Coyote came, and Mount Bushery to us was Flint Man, and Flint Man was a bit of a monster. He was very chauvinistic and he was very high on himself. He was very handsome. You know, that flint rock is a beautiful rock, and he was a very tali swing numt. He was a very handsome monster. And he didn't like Coyote because Coyote would walk around thinking he was all sweet and noob. So they fought over each other, you know, who's better looking, who's the better trickster, who can do better. And there was always a competition between them. But so they had a fight between themselves. And Coyote eventually won. And Coyote slashed the head of that flint man. And that explosion took place, and it scattered flint all throughout the territory. The majority of that flint landed on this mountain here. So that's why we know we can gather flint on this mountain. So it's very important to acknowledge Mount Bushry from this site. So we have Sncəwips, where we shape the arrowheads. We have sntsk'il'ntn, where we find the resources for the arrowheads. And we have Mount Bushry, ecologically, where that once flint man exploded and shared his resource, and Coyote said from here on out, you're no longer going to be a monster that harms the people. You're going to be a resource for the people to be, so that we can live and use tools in a way that benefits us. So we have to take that as a responsibility. It's not a present. It's not something that we take and say thank you very much and fare thee well. It's something we take and we say this is now my responsibility to manage, and that's why we would have people up on this mountain. The other thing I want to mention, so I mentioned sntsk'il'ntn a few times. Who's ready to say that word with me today? Hey, holy, sntsk'il'ntn. That refers to that Windy Bay area, but what I need to share with you is that there's actually 7 different names for a Westbank, and it all depends on your perspective. So when I say sntsk'il'ntn, I explained that this morning as I come from the place of change. It's not necessarily my original home. I come from Okanagan, and maybe I'll share that with you. I can see that from here. But sntsk'il'ntn recognizes that place of change. If you look from this side, though, it looks blue, does it not? Unless I'm colorblind, I hope it looks blue. I've been told my greens and blues have not always been parallel to one another. But if we look over there, so we could also refer to this area as sncəwips. Sncəwips represents the blue side. And so that acknowledgement of that, when you're coming from the eastern mountains, when you're coming from this direction, you look across, you're going to the blue side. Okay, so that's one of those names. We also have Sncəwips. And so it was acknowledged here that this protects the ponderosa pine, this area here, these parks here. Sncəwips represents the pine side. So if you're coming from the west and you're coming down those mountains, you experience a lot of pines. And so you have different names for different places. Sometimes you have many names for one place. And so again, that goes back to my presentation. When it came time to name trails, it's not as easy as just picking a name out of a hat and going, that's what it's going to be, because there's some ramifications, there's implications or ramifications of choosing that name and writing it on either a plaque or on a stone or on a sign. So we have to acknowledge that not everything is as it seems. The other cool thing about this mountain, so on the way up here, I don't know, you're probably all having your awesome important meetings, but if you looked out the sides of your windows there, you'd see a lot of fir boughs. And so that's also important, because down below where we'd have our winter villages, those winter homes would be lined with fir boughs. And so those fir boughs, I was always like, man, where do we get all that fir? Because it was a large village. It was a very important place for many Okanagan people. It was a very important site. But that would take a lot of fir boughs to line, you know, dozens and dozens of pit houses. But if we come up this mountain, you can see the fir boughs are there. So this mountain is not just a place where we find arrowheads. It's not just a place where we can hunt and fish and do all those things, because it's all right there. It's that place where we have so many other resources available to us. There's such rich diversity, and that diversity is important. And I want to correlate this with your presentation about how BC is doing pretty good when it comes to diversity, biodiversity, but I want to correlate that to language diversity. BC is the most diverse place when it comes to languages, and I do believe there's direct correlation, because this was taught to me at UBCO, between language and biodiversity. You know, there's an acknowledgement of that, of indigenous knowledges, and so that's why we share some of these names. Sncəwips doesn't translate to Mount Bushry. It doesn't translate to Flint Man. It translates to laying or sleeping grizzly bear. So remember that the names that we have today that we recognize aren't always the super traditional names. Sometimes we alter that. And that's why the opening this morning with Crystal, when she provided her traditional welcoming and it was full of jokes and laughter, that's who we are. We're a people that has the right to change how we want to share our culture. We have a right to change how we acknowledge these lands. And so what we're going to do right now, so we've seen kind of the west over here, we've seen the mountains on this side. So what we're going to do, we're going to take a hike up right where Kathy is there, and we're going to talk about the north, if that's all right. So Go that way. And almost, well, you can see the tail end of Kalamalka Lake, I'm assuming, or maybe that's Duck Lake, I can't tell from here. But you can see the north, so you can see what's happening. So those syilx, those runners, those message carriers, they would go down to the village down below, but they would also have to pass that message all the way up to the head of the lake, to the north. And so it's not an easy job. We talk about the health and well-being of Okanagan people. We weren't lazy. We still aren't lazy. We're hard-working people because our ancestors were hard-working people. It was, you know, we look around, we have a supermarket all around us. We can see, we can gather, we can hunt, we can fish. There's so many things we were able to do today, even still, but back in the day, those resources were even more plentiful. You know, when we talk about hunting and gathering today, when we talk about it down in the valley bottom, people often look around and go like, man, you must have to go a long ways to do your hunting and gathering. Well, not necessarily. Back in the day, those animals used to come down below. Back in the day, the name Kilauna was common because Kilauna, who's the grizzly bear, comes down and used to come down right to the shoreline of the beaches. And so we have that acknowledgement of those resources and the effects of colonization, of resource mismanagement, and how that affected our relationship with the animals. Yes, it's hard work for today for us to go hunting and fishing, and yes, it was hard work back in the day, but we were up to task. We were able to make those journeys. Even, I have most of you know Mick, former councillor Mick Werschik. He tells really good stories, but he was telling me a story about one of his elders, how they used to go down to Christina Lake and they used to catch the train, and so he went over to Christina Lake and then was supposed to come back on that same train, but the train left without him, so he just ran. He ran all the way back from Christina Lake all the way here and didn't bat an eye. Just that's what he had to do. And so that's an acknowledgement that those ideas of being a runner isn't something that's so far-fetched, that's so ancient, that's so historical. Those were happening within our generations, within our grandparents' generations. And so we have to acknowledge that although it's a far distance from here, it wasn't impossible. You know, nothing is impossible. Along those journeys though, you always have those resources. So one of the resources that we have that moves throughout this park that we have today is snc'il'ntn. Snc'il'ntn is the elk. And the elk is very important. So we wouldn't necessarily do our elk hunting on this side. We would do it on that side, kind of below Little White up there. But that allowance for those resources to travel through was something that we nurtured, we embraced, and we celebrated back in the day. It wasn't just oh, we hope we get it. It was, we know if or when we're gonna get it because we have people monitoring those herds. Those people up here would monitor which animals are coming, which resources were blossoming. They'd be able to notice if there's a fire taking place, because fires were important to us. Sometimes we would have to do prescribed burns to make sure that we don't have those fires that we have these days. You know, they're scary today, and people always ask, oh, why don't we just do prescribed burns? Because, well, if we did that, though, it would be unmanageable. You know, so we have to give thanks to our ancestors for preparing these lands in a way so that we can thrive today. Things like the mountain pine beetle that came through, that devastated our forests, but it's because of things like the prescribed burns of generations ago that made sure that we had a forest to bring back and to nurture today. So when we look down to the north, it's very important that we acknowledge that yes, this was a big village here, but our main village was down up to the north. I would say down because we're on top of the mountains, so it's down that way, but it's to the north, and that was our main village. That's where our high chief would sit. And so if we were sitting here and we noticed that there was a war party coming from the east, we would have to send that runner to let them know so we can defend ourselves. And so it was really important to acknowledge that. And they didn't always have to run. You know, we did have things called canoes, and so although you'd have to run down to get there, to get down to Mission Creek, as soon as you got there, you jump in your canoe and you're heading up the lake. From here, I'm gonna share this bit of information. So I've said this a couple times. I'm from sntsk'il'ntn, but I'm also from Quashmanik. Quashmanik translates to the place of lots of poop. Okay, and I always get, that's good. I'm glad you laughed, because if you didn't, then my joke wouldn't work. But that translates to the place of lots of poop. And for a long time, and even today, people say, oh man, because there's a little creek up there. It's O'Keefe Creek today, but back in the day it was just Minik Creek, and that translates to Poop Creek. And so people always joke, oh, you're from Poop Creek. And yeah, sure am. But that Quashmanik was important because it didn't acknowledge like people poop. It was animal poop. It was a place where all the animals would come and gather and lay their droppings, and so it was rich land. It's where we can hunt without even having to leave our homes. It was where we can gather resources because they were plentiful. So Quashmanik, again, it goes back to that place of the importance of names. You know, if Sherry called me up and said, let's rename that place, I might not name it Quashmanik because that's could be misunderstood, but I might just say, you know what? In our culture, it's appropriate to acknowledge that important site for our people, that reclaiming of that history, that reclaiming, you know, when I talked about the idea of Mission Creek running red like blood, you know, that doesn't paint a beautiful picture, but it's red with salmon. The color of that salmon is the blood, it's the life force of our being. So if you think about it in that way, those rivers running red like blood, that's the life force of our community here today. This district, the wonderful thing about this mountain is you can look down, you can see almost the entire Okanagan district. So if you think about the Syilx nation as a whole, 69,000 square kilometers of land that goes east over across the Kootenay Lakes, west almost into Hope, down south almost into Wilbur, Washington, and up north, north of Revelstoke, it's quite a large amount of land. It was separated into various districts. Where we're looking right now is the Okanagan district, the sntsk'il'ntn district. And it wasn't just because we thought it was a nice name. It was the natural topography, it was the natural ways the waters flowed. It brought people to this center. It was always a hub of activity. And so this sntsk'il'ntn district was really important. So this site right here is one of the most important sites for our people because this was our source of everything we needed to know. It was our global news, like I mentioned before. You can tell when negative things were happening, when weather was happening, when good things were happening. You could tell when hunting was good or hunting was not so good. So it was very important to our people. So this district that we call the Okanagan today, this valley that we call the Okanagan today, it has resonance in our history of being the sntsk'il'ntn district. And so think about how the water flows. That flood that we had in the spring was a good reminder that water is the most important resource that we have here in the Okanagan. We can't mismanage it. The water comes from the mountaintops. I'm happy that there's snow up there now because that helps me explain how that works. You know, hopefully most of you understand that. But the water comes from the mountaintops, it flows down. Our people would be at the mountaintops because it's easier to go down than to go up. And so it's really kind of interesting to look around and see the diverse resources available in this one particular park. And now just imagine that all of this at one point in time was our park. All of this at one point in time was our supermarket. All of this at one point in time had biodiversity intertwined with sustainability. It wasn't just something that we hoped that would happen. We knew what was going to take place. We can predict what was going to take place because we would sit on top of these places. The last little bit of park interpretation I'm going to share with you is a little bit of my own personal history. So, Ntatupa tui unteus isquis. So my great grandfather, has too many greats in there, he's really great. His Okanagan name was Umteus. Umteus translates to standing on top. That's what this place represents. That was a responsibility. You stand on top, you're now in charge of everything that you see. It's easier to paint this picture. Think of Lion King. When Mufasa took Simba and said, look out onto the land. Everything you see here is your kingdom. That's who we are as Okanagan people. We stand on top of these mountains to acknowledge our responsibilities to each and every one of us that live down below us, that live around us. Not just the people. They're very important to us. And so it's not just something that we look after. It's not something that we manage. It's our responsibility to make sure we protect these areas, to celebrate these areas, and celebrate the work that we have together. We're sharing the load now. For a long time, it was always responsibility of Indigenous peoples to be the stewards of the land, to protect the animals and speak on behalf of the trees. Today we're doing that together. You know, and there's a big request for indigenizing methodologies, indigenizing pedagogies, indigenizing school curricula. And what I remind people is that we were already doing it. We were sneaky. It's just like how I started naming trails going, I'm secretly claiming land back from my people. We do that in the classroom. We do that in our institutions. We do that all around. We just have to acknowledge when it happens and celebrate that and not be afraid of it, because it's natural. It's natural to love all that's around us. You know, I'll go back and reflect on that, on my presentation this morning when I got us to close our eyes and imagine being in that bounty castle and rolling around and feeling that static electricity just pull on every little sense in our body. That's the feeling I get when I stand on top of this mountain. I feel that connection, that responsibility, but it's not overwhelming. It's not daunting. It's celebration. I have a role. I have a responsibility. We all have that responsibility, and we can celebrate in it together. The resources that we have, they're going to be here for us. If we mismanage it, if we destroy it, well, we're not going to do ourselves any favors. You know, we got to remember that we look after each other. Syilx represents weaving many strands to make one strong whole, one beautiful fabric. The more diversity you have in that fabric, the more colors you have in that fabric, the more beautiful it can become. The more ideas that come in, the ingenuity just bubbles from us. But you always have to remember, when it comes to our knowledge, that our syilxness, our connections to these lands, are so deeply rooted into this place that they can't be disturbed. There was attempts for over 100 years to take those roots and get rid of them, throw them down the creek, never to be seen again, to steal our language, to steal our children. But it was our spirit, our connectedness to the land that kept us alive. It was our spirit that allowed us to laugh, to share in this laughter together. You can't disrupt those spirits. You can't disrupt that syilxness, that interconnection. But you can be a part of it. So celebrate that. Celebrate your responsibility. We talked about this morning. Reconciliation. Keeps coming up. It's an important idea. It's an important process. But we're not reconciling anything here today. We're acknowledging that the path forward is going to be taken by both of us. There has to be room for all of us to walk that path together. There has to be acknowledgement that everyone has a role in that reconciliation process. You know, I'll work towards it, but I already mentioned this morning. It's not going to happen within my lifetime. The work that we're doing here today is going to be celebrated by our future generations. And if we do it right, they're going to look at us and look at the history books and go, those folks, they had something going that was super awesome, super positive. Let's celebrate that. If we take a wrong turn, it's okay. If we mispronounce some words here and there, it's okay. You know, we're learning together. We're celebrating together. We're acknowledging each other's roles and the need for more education, more engagement, more practice. That's fine. I don't want to be looked down upon by my future generations as someone who didn't do anything. That's why I feel that excitement in my body. That's why I feel like I'm on that bounty castle 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, because that responsibility lives all around me. You know, and feel it, embrace it. It's a wonderful feeling. So just celebrate that.